I am beyond thrilled to be here. Kia, thank you so very much for the invitation to join you and all of your colleagues here today. And as I get started, I will invite you, if you see something on the screen here that you think is interesting or you want to take home with you, please take a picture of it. My deck is really heavy, so I won't be sending it out to everybody, but please do feel free to take pictures, share, and oh, here we are, good, slides, brilliant. So welcome to the conversation today. We must be willing to give up the life that we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. This is the central line, logic, theme of every story, book, legend, film, movie, fable that we have ever sort of encountered in the history of humanity, right? The hero or the heroine must leave the place where they are comfortable, the things that they know, in order to embark on a journey and have a bounty that they could never have enjoyed had they simply stayed wherever it is that they were. And this is certainly true in the moment that we're living in now, and it is true for my career as a futurist, only differently than Luke Skywalker coming home to a black smoking hole and needing to go off onto an adventure in Star Wars. My encounter was one with self-driving trucks. It was August of 2016, and I was at a conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Peter Diamandis, one of the world's foremost futurists, bounds onto the stage and starts talking about the possibilities of self-driving trucks, how they're going to change logistics and manufacturing and everything that we understand as business, and how this is going to unleash opportunity for so many people. And on the one hand, I'm on the edge of my seat going, this is amazing, I can't wait to see what's going to happen, and then it hit me like a lightning bolt. But hold on, what are we going to do with all the people? Because I started to think about the truck drivers and what if they lose their jobs, and the gas stations and the diners and all of these ancillary economies that are built up around this. What are we going to do with all the people? And this hit me particularly close to home because I was born and raised in Detroit. And while there are many reasons for the city's economic challenges over the years, one of them is certainly that we did not think preemptively about the impact of technology in work in our working world. And so with the people of Detroit in mind, I started to dive down into the research around what is it? What are these dynamics that are shifting this world that we're living in right now, that each and every one of us in this room and every single person on the planet really is going through? Because I wanted to understand, not only sort of the question initially was like, but what are we going to do with all the people, or what are all the people going to do? The more sophisticated version of that is how might we empower ourselves in the face of great uncertainty and disruption? So I started to go down the rabbit hole, and I want to share with you the dynamics of this, because as we talk about empowering ourselves, empowering our constituents, empowering those with whom we're working, these are the dynamics that are impacting what's going on in the world. So first thing was the impact of technology and work in our working world. And what this was. So I started to do the research. This was back in August of 2016. The seminal study in this area, 2 economists out of Oxford mapped every single job in the database of the Bureau of Labor Statistics here, run some algorithms and say, okay, 47% of jobs here in the US are susceptible to being computerized or taken over by robots. Subsequently, that has been confirmed by a series of other organizations. So, okay, 47%, but what does this actually mean? Well, over time, the dynamics of industrial revolutions tell us that productivity and access and abundance is going to grow, but when you start to strip that away, it can take up to 3 generations. So this is a book by one of the co-authors of that original study. It can take up to 3 generations to recuperate the economic power and standing that a family had prior to the Industrial Revolution. So what are we going to do with all the people, right? How are we going to empower ourselves? Then the other big shift in technologies is a hugely empowering one, is what happens when 4 billion people who had never had access to the internet, the educational and entrepreneurial opportunities that it provides come online. What is this going to mean for our global shift in dynamics? And these were the projections back in 2016, that there would be the entire planet basically online, and we are sort of on track to do that. Ericsson just released this data that by 2027 we're going to have 7.7 billion smartphone contracts. So the entire planet is now online, having access to the opportunities that are available here to the global market. What can this mean for us? What challenges, what risks? The second big dynamic I started to look at was a shift in global workforce population. And the first piece of that is the precariousness around work. right? The gig economy. Here in the US, the numbers from over the past few years have grown from 23% of the US labor force working in gig economy of some kind to 34%. And now between primary and secondary or tertiary streams of income, we're starting to bump up into the 40th percentile, right? So what do we do in a world, particularly in the United States, where so much of our security is rooted in this thing that we call job, in a world that there might not be these kinds of jobs? And then shift in workforce population. We have the aging dynamics, of course, of the baby boomers here in the United States, but that Peter Diamandis, the same futurist who inspired my research in this space, has been doing a lot of work in healthcare. And essentially, if we can manage to survive for the next 15 or 20 years, we will have another 15 or 20 years of healthy life expectancy. So what do things like job, savings, financial empowerment mean when our lives are extended materially? And then the third thing I began to look into were these economic dynamics, right? The dynamics of recession, inflation that we're moving through right now. These are the numbers through September. And then if any of you have read Ray Dalio's book, A Changing World Order, he maps the big dynamics and the ascensions and declines of major world economies, and essentially where the US is right now is very much in this space of decline. Now, what this means for us, we don't yet know, other than we are in a space of significant disruption. Now, any single one of these dynamics on their own creates big impact, right? The impact of technology and work in our working world, the shifting workforce population, the economic dynamics. But what happens is the dynamics of convergence. When all of these three things come together, the degree of disruption grows exponentially. Now, there is more change on the horizon because the pandemic hit us like a lightning bolt, and what it actually ended up doing was accelerating this whole series of dynamics that were already coming. And where we are is at the beginning of 100 years of technological change squeezed into the next decade. And so what that means practically, if you think about more or less horse and buggy to a Tesla, that's, for illustration's sake, a little bit over 100 years, but that's one product. Imagine every industry, healthcare, education, biology, logistics, manufacturing, all of these big shifts that are happening. And there is no cavalry coming. There is no future committee that's out here designing what this future is going to be, that's going to open the doors and welcome us to a future that is already set in stone. We are that cavalry. And right now, so what are we going to do with this? More importantly, what are we actually going to do with all of this? And now is a very interesting moment because it is at once the manifestation of everything that has come before and the moment in which we design, craft, architect, create this future that's here. The future isn't some out here space. It's happening right now. Now, I realize I just made a case for chaos and disruption, and often when I walk into the room, it is fear and invalidation and insecurity and, oh my God, what are we going to do with all of this? I understand that, and I traffic in uncertainty, and so I know what that feels like, right? And though in the same now, we do have a choice. We can look at that side of it, which is true, right? Let's not be Pollyanna and pretend that there isn't big change and disruption. But if we are willing to unhook from the way that we thought that things were supposed to be, there's actually more opportunity hiding inside of this disruption than we have ever had in the history of humanity. And so today, the exciting thing is we're going to take those same dynamics of convergence, and I think this is one of the most exciting things. When we see the big macro shifts that are happening that are making disruptive changes, we can utilize those same dynamics to create opportunity. So those dynamics of convergence, today we're going to explore shifts in paradigm, shifts in strategy, and shifts in leadership as a bit of an antidote to that shift. Shall we? Yes, I see people, please, let's get out of the chaos, oh my goodness. So, paradigm shifts, strategy shifts, and leadership shifts. So, I mentioned that in August of 2016, I saw Peter Diamandis, I started to do all of that research. In January of 2017, I decided to do the next logical thing, which is to put everything that I own into storage, except for what fits into a carry-on suitcase, to use my life as an experiment and research project to answer that question. How are we going to empower ourselves in the face of all of this uncertainty and disruption? I've done another talk that you can find online. It's a TEDx that goes into that. But one of the things that I discovered are the big paradigm shifts that are happening. And so if we can understand these paradigm shifts and what their logic is, then we can make better and more empowered decisions. So the first shift that we're moving to and through is the move away from scarcity and into abundance. And practically, a couple of examples of this are we are moving away from a world where access to financing was centralized into a world where it is more democratized, right? This picture is here's the Seagram's building in Manhattan, home of venture capital, right? Back in the day, you used to have to know somebody who knew somebody to be able to land a meeting in one of these hallowed rooms and get your dreams funded, right? Today, the multi-billion-dollar crowdfunding campaign or crowdfunding platforms that are out here, anyone with a good idea and an iPhone or a decent camera, right, can make a video and have access to global funding. So this is really exciting. Secondly, we're moving away from this concept of the business of business is business, so Milton Friedman rolling over in his grave as we shift over into this world where the business of business is creating value. And we look at models like Riane Eisler's from The Real Wealth of Nations, where not only the value that's created in the economy is the market economy, the illegal economy, and the government economy, but we start to look at things like the $10.9 trillion in unpaid women's labor in the world and marketplace, the natural economy. And we start to see these moves in the SEC demanding that companies report ESG. We see this in Patagonia and a whole series of other things. So our sense of value is being broadened. So scarcity to abundance. Secondly, we're moving from linear to exponential to quantum. Right, the first and second industrial revolutions had a very sort of linear incremental rhythm to them. The digital revolution, which started with computers, Moore's law, is exponential. And now we are in the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, ubiquitous connectivity, where the physical world and the technological world are melding. This is a quantum sort of space that we're moving in. And what does this mean for all of us? So let me just explain exponential dynamics, because these are at work and at play in everything that we're doing. Everybody's seen an exponential curve, compounding interest for the folks in the room, right? But it has that feeling of nothing's happening, wait, is something happening? Oh my God, everything already happened. Right? Like, sort of like having a bowl of avocados on your kitchen counter. It is that. And Peter Diamandis, in his book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, talks about the 6 phases of exponential shift. And so if you're in a corner of the marketplace or you're working with folks who are saying, oh, it's fine if this is occurring in Silicon Valley or over in some other industry in the marketplace, but it's never going to happen here, we're just in the nothing part of this dynamic. And so what this means, so the 6 phases of this, first there's digitalization. Anytime anything becomes digital, it hops onto the back of Moore's law and it starts to accelerate its power of acceleration. Secondly, deception, that trough of technological deception, right? It doesn't work the way they said it would. Almost everything version 1.0. Currently we are in that with the metaverse. There's so much hype around, everybody's spending billions of dollars, and there's like 5 people showing up to this thing. Patience, everybody. The world is shifting in that direction, right? Because in the background, people are making it better, they're improving it, and so that third step is disruption. This is that inflection point. Blockbuster and Netflix is the one that everybody knows about. Thomas Cook was a travel agency that continued to double down on investing in physical agencies, physical properties in the world, and didn't believe that online was the way to go. Fast forward through some time, and the British government seizes all of their assets and they cease to exist, right? So big disruption is occurring. The fourth piece of the exponential dynamics are demonetization. So folks like, we call my stepdad Ben Franklin because he likes to save money. So folks who love to save a dime love the demonetization part, right? So things become more accessible for folks. This happened with photography. Developing film used to be very expensive. Now if you have one of these phones, you can have pictures anytime you want. Fifth, dematerialization. So think of that drawer of cords and plugs and everything that you have in your house. Basically now this little box can do everything that used to require an entire room of equipment. And then finally, democratization, and this is where things start to get interesting. We talked about that financing piece, scalability with access and pricing. So we have at much cheaper prices, more people have access to the big things that are here. Quantum dynamics, right? What are they? From quantum physics, the dynamics of quantum are emergent, right? And that 2 truths can be true at the same time. So everything exists at a fundamental level as both a wave and a particle. And that coexistence means that 2 truths can be true. And so when we're looking at our planning, our strategies, multiple realities can be true at the same time. And then finally here, that analysis does not necessarily equal predictive power. So with quantum physics and quantum dynamics, even if you have all of the data in the world, just because you have a great data set doesn't necessarily mean that you can 100% predict the outcome. So what does this mean as we move through a world, and what does it invite us to do in our own planning for our organizations and for those who we serve in a world that is demanding that we be agile and paying attention to everything that's happening at every moment? So what are some of the implications of these paradigm shifts? First, the logic of the metaverse is shaping the workplace. So this ubiquitous, we experience it with Zoom in a much more sort of analog level, but this idea that we can be anywhere, that an avatar can represent us in one place or space, that work can be done in and from multiple locations, access to the internet becomes incredibly important. So as we think about this logic, even though the metaverse isn't working, we're still in that version 1.0, how it develops is going to impact how it is that we do our work. Secondly, structures become more fluid. Inside of our organizations, we're moving away from pyramid or hierarchical kinds of structures and into a model that I call infinity leadership, which invites people, regardless of title, to step into a leadership role if the project or if the moment demands it, right? And then finally, careers become mosaics. So the way things used to be, one track, one career, 35 years at the same company, you get your watch and then you're out the door. Now, certainly we've seen over the last couple of decades that no longer holds true. There are some statistics that I've seen that have said, folks graduating from college right now may have upwards of 20 jobs in their lifetime with job hopping and other things that are happening. So whether things are that extreme or not, our need to create careers that are anchored in the things that we value becomes increasingly more important. Okay, paradigm shifts. Number one. Strategy shifts, number two. I mentioned here that we were moving through this series of industrial revolutions, and the first and second industrial revolutions were industrial, in fact. As was the third, I would say. You could argue maybe not because of the digital, but now as we are shifting over into this fourth industrial revolution, I would say that it's not even industrial anymore, right? We might be looking at a revolution of productivity, or I would say even a revolution of energy. What does work mean, even at a fundamentally energetic level, and what are the possibilities that this can unleash? And so in quantum, right, when we were taught, does anybody remember like fourth grade science? And you were taught like the model of the atom that has like, the nucleus at the center and those things that were orbiting it, and we were taught that that thing in the center, the nucleus, was solid. Well, it turns out that that's not true. It turns out that sort of, as we break it down, it is mostly space, 96.4% space, empty, 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 and the rest of it is a smattering of random waves that might snap into a particle every now and then, but it essentially means that nothing is anything and everything is nothing except for vibration and frequency, which means that in every moment as we're thinking about our strategy, and in every moment in a world that's continuously disrupted and disruptive, there's new possibilities happening in every moment if we can, again, unhook from whatever or however we thought the world was going to work and begin to explore what's emerging right here, right now. So how do we do that? Well, there's a model that I'm going to share with you here. So there's linear strategy, there's exponential strategy, and there's quantum strategy, and we're going to move along this strategic spectrum here. So thinking about these in terms of their forms, right? So a linear strategy, traditional strategic planning. On day one, you say and determine whatever it is that you're going to do by the end of year 5, and you map your way there, and you have it's a pretty rigid pathway along. You don't really deviate from that plan from day 1 to the end of year 5. Exponential planning is more of a map. You say where you are, you decide where it is that you want to go, but you have a lot more flexibility along the way. If any of you have worked with design thinking, it's sort of much more that kind of practical application. But the quantum thinking is more like a compass. What happens when you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going and things are emerging right now, like it happened at the beginning of the pandemic. We've all experienced this. So the forms they take are aligned with that. And each and every one of these has a driving question. And as we're thinking about our strategic planning in moments like the world that we're living in, none of these questions replace the other. They can each make our planning more robust, the same way that Einstein didn't replace Newton, it simply broadened our understanding of what physics was. But linear thinking was past anchored. It asks the question, what can we logically do with what we've already done, what we already know? This is predictive. We're used to doing this. Exponential planning asks, given that we're here, what do we want to create free of constraints of the past, right? So we free ourselves up of whatever our past assumptions are, and we plan in that direction. And quantum asks the question, right now in this very moment, what's emerging from the market? And again, all three of these things together, we're coming up toward the end of the year, and on strategic planning for many of you, what happens to your strategic plan if you run it through each of these three questions? How might you be able to make it more robust? Right, so past anchored, future focused, and present emerging. And then finally, as we look at data, right, the difference or distinction between being data driven, data informed, and data receptive. Data driven, everybody is pretty familiar with. Data informed, design thinking, where you come up with ideas based on the experiences and things that you already know or the information set that you have. But data receptive is like an amazing football player. So I'm a University of Michigan fan, go blue. And this is our running back. He's amazing. He's a tank. He's like 5'8", 5'9". Oh, he's like rock star. But you better believe that he's studied, he's watched all the game films, he practices, he lifts every day. But in the moment on the field, he is paying attention to what is emerging from each instant that's there. And that's what I mean by data receptive. So as we're moving through our working days, what's happening in each and every moment? That's there. Or the distinction between thinking and doing and being. Right? So if you were a student in school ever, that was the thinking part. If you were an intern at any time, that was the doing part. But once you're 10, 15, 20 years into a career, there is an isness about that is present forming and is there. So this model here, if anyone wants to take pictures of the full one, yeah. So run your strategic plan through this, right? And as we are thinking about working with those in your constituent groups or in your ecosystems, these tools can certainly support as you're moving through that. So what are the implications of these kinds of strategy shifts? First, as we're thinking about our strategy, first and foremost, diversity is non-negotiable. As we're thinking about our own organizations, everybody needs to be at the table, period, point blank. Secondly, right becomes relative. And so this notion of absolute certainty in every moment or needing to have everything, all of our ducks in a row before we take action isn't necessarily the case, because what if multiple truths are true simultaneously? So how do we begin to navigate this? And then finally, this distinction between future proofing and future preparing. There is no future proofing, right? And in fact, I used to, if you look up old stuff that I've done online, I used to talk a lot about future proofing. And I have come around to understand that it is absolutely futile exercise. Sort of like trying to go over to the Pacific Ocean with a bucket and a mop and soak it up. There's just no way to proof against all of the disruption that's here and coming. So the more interesting thing is, how do we prepare for that? And this strategic map that I just shared with you, or this spectrum, is one way to really help us anchor inside of that. So paradigms, strategies, and now finally leadership. So how can each and every one of us, for ourselves and then for those with whom we work, strengthen our leadership in these moments, in this age of great and increasing disruption? And there are three ideas that I want to share with you here. First is regenerative resilience. And this is a program that was born out of the pandemic. It was September of 2020, and I was very concerned about what was going to happen. This was pre-election at the time. I was concerned about what was going to happen in our country with the backdrop of social justice, George Floyd's murder. Was there finally going to be any real movement in terms of policy, systemic changes and structures, and our disconnection because of the pandemic, communicating over platforms. What were we going to do? So I had this idea that I would reach out to all 4,763 of my connections on LinkedIn and invite them into a 20-minute conversation. And inside of that conversation, I would ask them 5 questions. What are you up to now? How are we connected? What do you see as the biggest opportunity? What do you see as the biggest challenge? And then what piece of advice would you share with a fellow human being? I didn't know what was going to happen, but over 7 weeks of time, I had 161 conversations, over 80 hours of dialogue, people in 24 countries, mayoral candidate for the city of New York, executives of publicly traded companies, entrepreneurs, academics, interns in the middle of Brazil, and 85% of those conversations centered around mental health and resilience. And so I upgraded my question. I went from how might we empower our success in the face of great uncertainty and disruption to how might we empower our success in the face of great uncertainty and disruption with no foreseeable end. Because if we're going to live inside of this, if this is going to be our normal, which is that nothing is normal, our brains were literally not evolved to handle this much disruption. And so I wanted an answer to this. How can we empower ourselves? And that's where regenerative resilience comes in. It's a 3-pillar program which is about empowering ourselves to shed the constraints of old leadership models, because frankly, for many of us, those weren't working anyway, and embody the practices that are going to help us thrive in this face of great disruption. And while in its fullest expression, this is a 5-week program. I'm actually teaching a semester of it this weekend at William & Mary, which is going to be bananas. It's 3 pillars. It is a clarity about who we are, what we're up to, why it's important, and how to protect those boundaries. Secondly, it's fearlessness. And you'll notice that I say fearlessness, not courage. Because courage, at its base, it's a fundamentally extractive thing, right? I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway, jump out of a plane and do whatever. And that's fine, you know, if you're like running away from a tiger on the tundra. But what if, you know, when we're looking at this change with no foreseeable end, how are we going to thrive in the face of it? And this is where fearlessness comes in. It's about managing the chemicals that are running around in our body. It's about planning in ways that resource our projects so that we have space to breathe and rest and have some downtime. And it's about learning how to name, define, and challenge the assumptions that we have about how the world is and how it works so that we can open options for ourselves. And then finally, connection, how we truly connect with others in these moments of great shift. Now, one exercise that I want to leave with you today, and we won't have time to do it, but that you can take back and do this with your teams, is one that I call creative self-destruction. So inside of one of the conversations that I had, a dear friend of mine from business school, Christopher Spikes, he founded a Brazilian women's athletic wear company called Othan. And in 2015, from zero, he grew it to grow 56 times the Brazilian stock market, or 144 times the level of Brazilian GDP, 127% average growth year over year, by implementing this practice of creative self-destruction. And what is this practice of creative self-destruction? Essentially, you say, okay, in our wildest dreams, where do we want our organization to be in a year? And then you say, okay, if I'm the CEO, if I'm the marketing manager, if I'm whatever position I am inside of the organization, the intern, who does the person in my role need to be in order for that organization to thrive? And then comes sort of like the look in the mirror question, like, am I that person today who is capable of leading that organization? And usually the answer is no. And there's no problem there, but then invites the question, what do I need to learn, unlearn, do, stop doing, or whom do I need to hire in order to help us achieve those goals? Right? And another thing that I found, so this is an exercise that I learned with Chris, but another thing that I've learned in my own practices with creative self-destruction and with thriving in uncertainty is that the more you disrupt yourself, the more you start to understand the dynamics of disruption, and the less fear you feel when disruption comes from external sources. And so this is a practice that can help make you and your organizations more robust. So that's the first one, regenerative resilience. The second one, as we're thinking about this, is simultaneous strategy. And one of the things that I'm really focused on now in my research, my current research, is how do we expand our cognitive capacity? Because, and not solely mental health, but how do we expand our cognitive capacity to be able to thrive better in these moments of real uncertainty? And one of those things is simultaneous strategy. And what I mean by that is from this moment of now, moment of right now, the ability to, as an individual or a team, employ short-term results-focused logic and explore long-term visionary possibilities concurrently to shape strategy and achieve tangible results. Right? So in the past, we would often separate, okay, I'm doing my now time planning and my future-focused innovation in separate buckets. But this moment that we're living in, this emergent moment, this quality of the fourth industrial revolution, is being able and needing to do both simultaneously. So how do we ride that edge? There's a great model. There's a wonderful book by one of the folks who I did my original research with. His name is Ichak Adizes. He wrote it called Mastering Change. And essentially, for each and every one of us as individuals, and then how we compose our teams, there are 4 profiles that can help us do this. And those 4 profiles balance themselves out by being short-term, effective and efficient, and long-term, effective and efficient. And who those people are, right? So we need 4 different profiles on our teams, or we need to recognize where our strengths lie within ourselves. The producer is the person who executes now. This is your salesperson or your fundraiser or your operations, sort of feet on the ground individual. The administrator is the person who makes the trains run on time. These are your systems, the structures, the scalability, all of this stuff, which is not my strong suit. And because I fall into the next bucket, which is the entrepreneur or the visionary who's looking out over the long term and seeing possibilities. And this fourth figure is the integrator, right? All four are necessary together. And you'll see that there's often tension between the two, right? Because the administrator needs to know how everything is going to work, ask that question of how. Where the entrepreneur comes in and doesn't care about how, wants to talk about the what this is going to change. And so oftentimes in meetings, you'll have this tension, and the tension is healthy, right? But you'll have this tension, and the entrepreneur is like, why are you trying to kill my dream by knowing all the how? And the administrator who needs to know the how is like, why are you talking so crazy? Like, help me understand what it is that you're doing. But all four of these are needed because over the long term, you'll see that each of them has a specific and important function. So the producer is short-term effective, but over the long term, particularly in a dynamic external market, is not so effective. And so that's where you need the entrepreneur to come in and help balance that out. And then short-term efficient is that administrator is the person who runs on time, but the diplomat, the one who's able to sort of integrate everybody together, is the one who can help everybody be much more efficient over the longer term. So that's simultaneous strategy. And then third and finally, empathetic curiosity. And there's a lot in popular press and research right now about the importance of empathy and leadership. And however, again, looking through this lens of what do we do with uncertainty with no foreseeable end, like that's the trick. We can do stuff over a discrete period of time and moment, but when we're looking at so much change, how do we not exhaust ourselves? Because empathy on some level requires that we have the same experience as those who we're working with. And so empathetic curiosity shifts the focus a little bit. Right? It's this practice of exercising empathy in a manner that both acknowledges current state. Right? So it's not Pollyanna, it's not ignoring, it's not bypassing with toxic positivity where people might be. But what it does is it shifts and uses the power of curiosity as a catalyst in a movement toward empowered and connected solutions, right? And so one of the models that you can work with, and again, in thinking about the ecosystems that you're working in, your organization or team, your clients or customers, partners who you work with, you can ask questions like, who makes up our ecosystem? Why is it that we do what we do? Who are we really serving? What do they think and need? And when was the last time that we actually asked them what they think and need? You know, I can't tell you, I had many conversations with C-suites or management organizations throughout the pandemic of companies who are structured in such a way that they have a corporate office and they have a front line. So retail, fast food, insurance sales. And I can't tell you how many times folks would come into the room with a strategy and say, what do you think of this strategy? Do you think the people on the front line will like it? And my first question was always, well, have you asked them? And almost invariably the answer was no. Right? So as we think about moving forward and what it is that we're creating, what it is that we're doing, actually being an effective conversation with those with whom we are working is an incredibly effective strategy. Right, so leadership implications. What does this mean for all of us? First, I mentioned this already, but this notion that brain health is priority number one, and mental health as a component of that brain health, but also our cognitive capacity, learning how to flex our brain from linear and local, which is how it evolved, to something that is global and expanded. How do we do that? So cognitive agility is that strategic imperative, being able to do now and futures thinking together. And then finally, the shift from subject matter student or subject matter expert to subject matter student. And you know, in the past, sort of the unquestioned authority about any given topic was an unquestioned authority about any given topic. But now that kind of lack of flexibility is a detriment. And so no matter how much we know about any given topic, about anything, the idea is that we approach it from a beginner's mindset because the world is shifting. Right, so I started off our conversation today exploring some of the big disruptions that are impacting us in the world, particularly as relates to workforce, economy. And the idea that there's a lot more opportunity hiding inside of that than there ever has been, only it looks different. So we've got to be willing to make that shift. We started out with big paradigm shifts, looking at how the world moves from or to and, from scarcity to abundance, and from linear to exponential to quantum. We talked about this strategy shift that we're moving through, and the ability to, and the importance of looking at our strategy and what it is that we're doing from multiple perspectives. And then finally, these notions of leadership. The empowerment of being regeneratively resilient in the face of great uncertainty and disruption, simultaneous strategy, doing now and futures thinking together, and then finally empathetic curiosity, how we both are with the moment and focused on and moving toward possibility. So what do we do with this now, with all of this that we've shared here today, and with this moment and the conversations that you're going to have over the next period of time? Because remember, now is at once the manifestation of everything that's come before and the moment in which our future is designed, architected, built, and strategized. And so fundamentally, go back to the truth of Joseph Campbell, we must be willing to give up the life that we have planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. And I will simply leave you with the question of whether or not you are willing. Thank you.